Ladies and gentlemen, welcome for the last Water and Communications panel. We've heard a lot of the last 5 days about what we need to do to reach the audiences that are critical to make the changes we need to see. Today we're going to discuss the importance of strategic communication to get these outcomes heard. I'm very happy to have on my panel today Maria Andren, Senior Director, Group Communications in Grundfos, Jay Carl Ganter, co-founder, managing director, Circle of Blue, and with us online, Marissa Marpequero, communications consultant, a member of the National Water Council in Mexico, and a water activist. Carl, I'm going to start with you. This time last year, all eyes were on the UN Water Conference happening in March. What was your perspectives of that water conference when it came to the communication and the messaging that needed to happen as a result of a huge undertaking and a number of people coming together to really say, now we want to see change?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the water conference was unprecedented. We never had a water conference before, and a lot of buildup, and it was critically important. But I think what happened is the expectations that media would discover water and would discover the water conference were probably a little overblown. And I think what we have to realize in the water space is, one, that we touch everything. Water touches everything we care about. But we also have to realize that this is an urgent situation. From the communication side, from the news side, this is a drama that is unfolding right now around the planet. So from a communications perspective, we have stories happening that are relevant to everyone. And I think what a conference does is really important to bring people together and to talk and to, in a sense, prepare to run out the room. But then we have to run out the room and know what to do and create, in a sense, the persistent messaging and communications. And that messaging has to be done in a way that everyone can see themselves in the picture, not just our friends in the water space.
So before I come to the next question, I'm going to actually do a follow-up. You say, so everyone can see themselves in the picture, not just. So unpack that a little bit more for me.
Yeah, I think in any communications challenge, and I come from the journalism perspective, we have to know, who do we want to reach and what do we want to do? What do we want them to do, right? So we talk about engaging youth, we talk about engaging corporate, but what does that actually mean? And I think we all have a different definition of what that looks like. And so it's not a meme, it's not a tweet, it's not a phrase. This is in a sense, a persistent challenge. It's not just a conference, it's not just a meme. And so how do we engage? So I think we really have to look inward before we look outward. What do we actually want people to do? And what does a year from now look like? What does 5 years from now look like? And we have to be willing to listen to ourselves and our messaging and what other people are talking about and course correct. This is not an initiative, it's not a one-time campaign. This is a tenacious, in a sense, journey that we're on.
So in terms of being persistent, the water conference should be seen as one step in that roadmap.
Exactly.
Not as a full stop or of a period. We actually need to build, leverage, continue.
Exactly. We shouldn't be fighting for a headline or a news piece on CNN or the BBC. We should be fighting for consistent reporting. And journalism, where I come from, is really hard. And one of the big challenges here is to build persistent trust and a sense of persistent drumbeat of, this is why you care.
So I'm going to come to Marissa. You're joining us from Mexico, and you've heard what Carl just said, saying that we can't go easy, it's urgent. We can't look at one event that's going to solve a problem and set expectations that perhaps don't get met. That expectation is a long-term journey. I want to ask you, you're working with a large number of stakeholders on the ground. How do you reach them? And how do you bridge this difference of geography? You've got New York and the UN conference, and you're working with people who have no internet connectivity. How do you actually get this communication and strategy to them? Marissa, we can't hear you. Just 1 second.
Well,
okay,
thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Marissa, we're having some problem with the connection. Do you want to start again?
Yes.
Perfect.
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
What I do, what I want is when
Marissa, we can't,
yeah,
unfortunately, hear you. Do you want to try one more time?
okay, that I will sure that yeah, I will make sure that people back home in my country, I will go to local events and meetings so I could really reach them in a more direct way. Carl said something about the media, about the message through media, but I believe in the importance of direct communication and face-to-face and reaching all those stakeholders who weren't there. What? Because of course we have to pass the messages, also the good practices that we saw and possible alliances, hopefully. And I think that we have to make sure that we are listening to all these positions of these people who are not attending somehow, and that we have to make sure that we have to ensure processes which are top down but also bottom up, and the time which passes between events or meetings are very important because that is the time that happens between commitments, dialogues, and then actions. I will also say that I will ensure that I am speaking, or that we are speaking in a cross-sectorial way. Yeah, we all have heard and know we have the SDGs, so that allows this cross-sectoral. We have for instance, we have been talking a lot about the nexus, and finally, I will say that I will actually go out of the red circle, the public opinion. I will actually, and with all my respect, going out of our circle of blue, our our bubble, blue bubble, and step a little outside and speaking also with everyday people. So if I can make sure that they understand our messages in a simple way, and that I can transmit also the urgency. So I think I will be doing my job a little better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marissa. And I think, Maria, what we're hearing now when Carl is saying persistent communication, Marissa's talking about direct communication, bottom up, top down, but also inclusive. Now, Grundfos has so many of these to take kind of cognizance of. You have offices all around the world, and you are leading in terms of water stewardship, but you have to create a corporate culture or imbibe a corporate culture in terms of reaching the last mile. How do you do that?
Well, I mean, at Grundfos, we work with strategic communications, both from an internal and external perspective. And I'd like to start by saying that, you know, the whole point is actually building bonds between different stakeholders and really trying to elicit change in terms of moving people in the strategic direction that we want them to be moved. All communications is about change. It's basically moving someone or something, a organization or a pool of people from A to B. And in order to do that, we actually need to look into our audiences and see what they think, feel, and do to begin with, and then map out what is it that we want them to think, feel, and do in the future. And of course, we use different tools to get that way. Our recipe that we use within the organization to build culture and values, but also to work with our external stakeholders, is really to work around providing information, providing inspiration, and then allowing them for involvement. Because that's when you get the action and you get the doing. And I think we've heard a lot at this conference this week, and one of the things that we now need to do is actually activate ourselves and actually get actions done. At Grundfos, one of the most powerful tools that we have today in terms of bringing our external messaging to the external stakeholders that we work with is actually our own employees. And we have something that we call social share programs, where we basically provide our employees with different social media postings that they can adapt and publish on LinkedIn or Facebook or other vehicles. Because in this day and age, we all know that the individual can influence quite a lot. If you look historically into communications, it's quite interesting to see how we've been progressing where, maybe decades ago, we listened to what our government said, and that was the sort of truth and the only truth. Then I think it progressed into corporations providing more of a truth. But now in this day and age, it's so important to also work with influencers. And that's why we've chosen to work with our own employees and really make them ambassadors. We have about 1,800 ambassadors today within Grundfos, which is a great number. And they have generated about 20,000 posts so far in just the last 2 years. So I think that's a great achievement. And it's one way of doing communications. But as you alluded to, Carl, and it's about finding the right channels to reach the right relevant audience, and really trying to find which way can you elicit communications that moves them.
I think what you've said, there's so many things that I'm scribbling down here. All communication is change, and I think that's really important, because then there's a responsibility on communicators to create that right kind of change. And when you talk about the employee engagement, when you talk about information, inspiration, involvement, what you're also doing is ownership. And once you feel ownership, you have a different relationship with the message. And that becomes really critical as well. And I'm going to ask Carl, actually, when we develop strategies for this, when it comes to the wider public, what Maria is saying is really important. How do we scale that? Information, inspiration, involvement, ownership.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the sphere of influence is so important, and I think it's underplayed. So look at the volumes, look at the numbers of employees of a lot of the large companies and organizations, and the amount of talent that's there. So when I say talent, meaning the employees themselves, being able to educate them, to educate students, youth, neighbors, politicians, communities, entire communities, to be ambassadors. That's really, really important. I think also companies and organizations have other tools that might not have come into play in the water space quite yet. You mentioned listening tools. So you listen for brand reputation, you listen for how people are buying and following those trends. How are people listening? What are they saying about water, right? Socially and the other pieces. So when you have government affairs departments, activate them in the policy side. Several companies have actually made commitments on sustainability, and policy is a major pillar. That would be really incredibly powerful. And then also on the sales and marketing side. There are billions of dollars in the sales and marketing side versus the CSR side. So how do you take a slice of that and activate that in a way that isn't just inward looking or looking at your own brand, but actually becomes collective, so that the water community, larger, whether it's Grundfos or the other companies playing in the water space directly, can actually start to coordinate. But it also brings up a question of trust, and we can touch on that in a bit, because we have an era where corporate brands are actually trusted more than many other brands or many other channels. And so how do we leverage and build that trust in an era where we have, in a sense, like the movie says, everything happening everywhere all at once?
I actually want to come to Marissa on this because, Carl, you say communities as ambassadors and actually getting them to be spokespersons for water. Now, Marissa, you're working across with river basins, with different communities. When you try and tie up these messages coming out of, again, things like the Water Conference, things like Stockholm also, and you work with your communities on the ground, how do you bring that 360? How do you bring it all together?
Well, actually, I'm going to take, and I am so glad that Maria said about the coherence between internal and external communications. I just want to start from there, Arathi, and to say that that we have to understand from where we are speaking. Whether if it is any type of organization, we need to be aware of the mission of these organizations. So all of the employees can be the water ambassadors, which was actually one of my last messages that I forgot to say in the other section. And I will also say that the scale from where we are speaking, it is very important. We frequently address the national, and the local, but one scale often missed is the basin scale, and this one is a fundamental part of the water resources management. And if we do not understand, and if we are not able to say why this is important to have collaboration between up and downstream users, for instance, then we are somehow failing, and we are not actually listening to these users and these stakeholders in that level. I'm sorry, there was a message here, and so I will make sure that all scales and all type of stakeholders can be heard. I think inclusion is so important. If we are seeing each other in different events and we are seeing the same faces, then we are also failing. And I will also say that I will go to key audiences, with the politicians, of course, with influent actors and users, such as the farmers. So we know that one of the biggest users are farmers. So why are we not speaking with them like more as a little bit, as I said, in this cross-sectoral vision? And finally, I will say, Arati, that it is not just about the relevance of what we say, but it's also about the meaningful of the message. So we have to identify ways to connect with specifically and more specifically with decision makers and the ones who really have power to do some changes. That is why initiatives like the CEO Water Mandate or the head of states that Catarina de Albuquerque has been talking about us these days are so important, because there is going to be an effect of cascade. And I'm finishing here saying that the coherence between what we say and what we do, it is so important, and that is why the engagement with our own and internal audiences, it is so important, because of course I agree that they are our water ambassadors, but we also have to look for inspiring leadership, because we need to build trust, and we need to build alliances, because we need to accelerate the change. And that will be
Maria
it.
has a comment to make in response to you, Marissa, but I just want to highlight what you say, the effect cascade. I think that's an amazing way of putting it, to say that you take actions and they have to actually move from one to the other. Maria, you had a comment.
Okay. Just a lot of great stuff that you just said, Marissa, so thank you. I just wanted to build on this whole idea about actually creating relevance. I was in the Meet the Laureate session yesterday morning, and I was very inspired, because I think that there was some key points that were made in that session around conveying science, but also conveying some of the very sort of radical stories that makes the whole agenda very relevant. And I think that's a key point. We can't just talk about water. We also need to, provide the science, the solutions to the world's water and climate challenges, but also illustrate that through relevant stories that help, again, to both inform, inspire, and involve the audiences to take action.
But I'm actually going to ask Maria a question really quickly to follow up on that, because you also mentioned, and we're weaving in between local, national, international. I think that's important in terms of the communication discussion. But you mentioned also how the conversation has moved from government to maybe NGO to industry. And Carl, you said that we're in a situation where people, of course, have more trust when it comes to industry than they do government. And then we've also talked about, in the different respects, ownership is critical to make this change. When Grundfos was in New York, for conferences like that, yes, conferences like the World Water Week, what is the industry ownership in terms of making this change? What did you see in March, and what would you like to see?
Well, I can only speak from my own perspective and the Grundfos perspective, and I think, we are moving, we're on a communications journey. My own experience from the UN Water Conference was new, as it was for very many of us, because it hadn't taken place before, as you said, Carl. But I think here there is a point to be made about the fact that there is no one silver bullet in terms of finding the solution for the water and climate challenges that we face. And thus I believe that communications professionals also need to figure out how to collaborate with institutions, with governments, with other companies, with other corporates, because we will need to do that in order to be able to solve this massive issue that we're actually facing It's not just for Grundfos to do it. We need to collaborate with others in our industry, as it were, to really push the agenda. So I think that there's a shift that we need to do in terms of, yes, we want to position ourselves. Yes, we want to make money so that we can push our own industry and our own company to, invest into innovations and development. But we also need to be open in terms of collaboration across the board in order to actually arrive at the solution that will make the world a better place and save the planet.
Collaboration, of course, and peer-to-peer collaboration has been something that we've heard now in these 5 days. And of course, there's a strong intent to do this. And we've heard from industry, we've heard from journalism, we've heard from, of course, activists and stakeholders. But then you have the layer on top of this, which is misinformation, which is bad journalism, which is disinformation. How do you work with that? And how do you cut through the noise to say, this is what you need to know? Carl, I'm going to ask you that.
Yeah, well, first I just want to comment on the relevancy side. I mean, why we cry at a movie is we see ourselves, we see our family, we see somebody in that picture. And that's how people move. That's how they, whether it's left brain and right brain, the spreadsheet side and the softer heart side. Now, the misinformation, disinformation, we are on a tsunami. We have AI, which can generate messages. We have special interests that may have other interests than what, say, the water folks have in vision. How do we do that? So from a journalistic perspective, journalism's hard. We can't do that by clicking and tweeting and retweeting and reposting. We have a saying that we did a big project in China on water and energy and revealed some really stunning facts that the country doesn't have enough water to continue mining and processing coal at current rates, right? So that puts it kind of in a whole new level of kind of national security and a whole kind of layer of relevancy, so to speak. But the misinformation, disinformation, how did we get that data? We were asked, and I said the process IWT. I was there. So we went there. We went there to verify. We went there to fight, to build the trust. We went there to capture the data. We went there to capture the context. And I think we have to be much more aware of that and much more nimble. We need to be willing to seize moments also at the same time. So when there's a flood in California, we need to be ahead of that. When there's a storm heading there, we need to put our experts out ahead of it. So in a sense, we can establish that trust and that credibility right up front. And we have to listen to what others are saying and be ready and willing to correct that right away.
I think trust and transparency is so important. Of course, Mary, I'm going to come to you to answer the same question. And we had Astrid on the stage yesterday talking about that one case. We talked about misinformation there and how Grundfos kind of had to counter it. It was very much I was there kind of reaction. What are your thoughts on how you will work with and do work with this constant threat of misinformation, disinformation?
Well, it is a threat. We build our operations around the reputation that we actually enjoy today. And as anyone who's working in communications, you know that it can go away in a second. You can trash your own reputation if you're using misinformation or fake news, as it were, or whatever. So we take great care in terms of ensuring that the information that at least we provide is validated and that we can back it up and stand for it. What others may say about us, that's a completely different story. And that's where issue management comes into play. Sometimes it's crisis management that comes into play. But then again, I think it's also about using your communication skills to build the perception, because in many issues and many crises, it's not just about the facts. It's about how you are perceived as in managing that. But fair to say, I think, we need to be on top of our game and ensure that we use information that is validated, that is not made up, that is misinformation or fake news that we put out.
Perception is so important. Perception is, of course, very hard to validate. And so in Grundfos and partners like you work to create that perception and trust and have translators to also verify. That becomes an important part of how to engage strategic communication and trust. But Marissa, I want to ask you a question now. In line with this, we've talked about reputation. We've talked about trust and transparency to help communities understand the message. Maria has talked about the threat of misinformation and disinformation, how to verify. We've touched upon the role of communicators and influencers. And Marissa, I want to ask you about the role of influencers, because of course we have advocates like Greta Thunberg that made headlines by virtue of being a young influencer. I was looking at TikTok to understand what's happening in the water community and messaging space. 800 million users. And accounts like Fridays for the Future, Extinction Rebellion have over 3 million followers. How do we work with this in the best way? Because we're not exactly Gen Z sitting in this audience right now. How do we have this intergenerational way of working and to make it effective?
Okay, I think you are giving me the opportunity to talk about something that it is crucial that I think the link between communication and education. Yes, we have speaks a person like Greta, and communication by definition and more in these platforms, it's brief. So we have to ensure and make sure that there is quality information out there, and it has also to be with misinformation. So I'm going to elaborate a little bit more, but let me go back to the example of Greta. I think she is a very good example of education for sustainable development. Why? Because I think that she received a privileged education, that this is the formal part of education, and the other part, it will be the informal education that she is at, where at her house, with the community, and also through media. I think she is the example of these little people who have information and then they have the possibility to act, which is what we are looking for. But let's not forget, please, the not connected. The people who are still not connected. We have 37% of the world population who hasn't used internet. So there is a gap very similar to the one who doesn't have water. And let me go to this other important public that we already mentioned, the youth. I think that also working with teenagers, it is very important because there is where the vocations are. And if we can connect their vocation to their formal education, to continue with their studies. Why? Because they are the young wild professionals who will be making decisions in generations from now, into these decisions of what we didn't accomplish and we left as a crisis. And also they are the intergenerational link. We have been working with them for a long time now. I remember that at the World Water Forum in Mexico, we actually had a forum for the youth, and also we need to realize the ones who are dropping the school out. And something else that I wanted to say, that we have this very good example also with the Junior Water Prize, and that we have the contest, but we also need to ensure that they have scholarships so they can keep or continue with their education. And finally, to look for the tertiary education. Why? Because education for sustainable development looks for people to have the skills and to increase their resilience. And as much as can we contribute to there to be more skilled, it will be better for everybody. And why? Because also we need positive participation. And I'm just finishing here with a last point about the influencers. I think, of course, that there are a lot of risk also because of the brevity that I mentioned before. We have the risk of oversimplification, being superficial, misinformation, the lack of diversity actually, and but and actually the lack of transparency. Who are they speaking from? But we
Marissa, I'm
also
going to have to stop you
just
there. Sorry, we're running out of time. But I think what you're saying now, we're talking about education for development, the role of children as communicators and actually being able to talk to their community and be the I was there. We've said a lot of things in this panel right now. And Maria, you said when we started, a lot of speculation, a lot of intent, but we need to actually now have action on the ground. From a communications point of view, from reaching the audiences we want to see and have them hear what we want to say. What do we need to do? We have a lot of events, the World Water Week being one of them, and of course a lot more in the fall coming up. What do you want to see happening here when it comes to communicating this need for change? Carl?
Yeah, really two things. One is we have a lot of bad stories. I mean, like I said, this is a drama that has heroes, victims, and villains. This is the most important story of our lifetime, right? So what I want to see is us not just tell all the bad stories or just tell the solutions. We need to tell the bad stories and then a pathway to the solutions, in a sense, that bridge. So I would leave us with what a good friend of mine who's a leading advertising executive always says. His mantra is, we need to make hope visible.
Powerful. Maria?
I'll be short and sweet. I think it's about collaboration and then informing, inspiring, and involving.
Thank you so much for being with us today. I want to give you a warm hand of applause, but before that, just to say, make hope visible, collaboration is key, and children are educators and communicators. Thank you so much. Please join me in giving them a warm hand of applause.